whole thing official. Today, demonstrating HTML and CSS. That's what we had to talk about. We'll talk till you're bored and want to go home or hungry. Who's had dinner already? Smart person. Good. I usually get hungry at some point. Now, one thing I've included this term for all of you is actually this set of FAQs that I wanted to tie into this lecture. I'll leave that up just for a few more minutes, because these questions come up a lot. And I think most of you, put your hand up if you've done no work in the course this term since the last lecture. Love it. That's good. Most of you have touched a little bit, so most of you have written a tiny bit. So I want to answer some kind of key questions. What version of HTML do we use? What did you say? 5, OK. HTML5, great. When was it released? Any ideas? 2014? I don't know. I don't keep that on my head, so I'm impressed if you know. I didn't include that in the answers. Yeah, it was released around 2014. Now, one thing I think is so important, and half of you will know this off the top of your head, so don't worry if I'm about to bore you, but understanding the difference between languages and compilers is a really important computer science concept. Languages are just rules people make up, right? Like you and I could sit down today and we could write a rule book that just says how we're going to speak English from now on, right? We use these words, we don't use these words, we construct sentences like that. We could write that book if we want to, you know? That's all a language is. It's a PDF, you know? You could go look up a lot of languages, it's just docs. Compilers are people who write programs that take in text and output some kind of executable code, right? Because all code you write, like a .js file, a .html file, a .css file, fundamentally they're just text files. They're just character streams of stuff. Now, whenever there's a new standard, what happens is the global communities who manage this stuff, they sit down and they say, wouldn't it be cool if we could do X, Y, Z in a web browser, you know, that we can't do right now? And they come together and they say, yep, this is the new standard. And usually the standard exists. And then there's a few big kind of compilers like Chrome and Mozilla and Safari, Opera, like the list goes on. And they'll be like, OK, I see the new standard. We're going to go implement that now. And then they'll go and implement that. So at some point, this new feature that someone writes exists. A really good example of that is the HTML audio tag. So this was part of the HTML5 standard. The audio tag was this new tag they made where you can basically create audio, and then you can include like a link to a file, like an image. You know, you got image source. You could basically include audio. You could include video. Before this standard, you couldn't do that, right? It just didn't exist. So you go back like 15 years, 20 years. What used to happen, and a bunch of you will know this story, there was an old piece of software called Flash. It was made by Adobe. It was kind of as big as Photoshop, and it was basically a tool. I should have said Adobe Flash. It was basically a tool where people originally went and made like cute little video games, right? Like, have you ever seen any of those like early stage millennial old joke videos on YouTube? A lot of that was made with these kinds of tools. And the thing that was cool about Flash was that it allowed you to do whole bunches of stuff. You could make games, you could make videos, whatever. So the original version of YouTube, as far as I know, it was actually built with Flash and designed to kind of stream video into it. So when you were using YouTube 20 years ago, your computer required the installation of Flash. It was like a third-party software, right? And that's how you could run stuff, because the web browsers just couldn't do it. It just wasn't possible. The HTML5 standard introduced a couple of things, such as the audio and video tag. And I'm not saying strictly YouTube does this, because I haven't looked at that in a while. But these tags meant, hey, from now on, web browsers have to be able to play video and play audio. Now, suddenly that opens up a whole can of worms where developers are like, maybe we don't need to use Flash. We can use this new stuff, and it be done straight in the browser. So now browsers will just play videos, we call it natively, right? They don't need any third-party add-ons and things like that. Flash died relatively quickly. If any of you are kind of tuned into tech history, it was mostly killed off by Apple. I don't remember the exact details, but essentially I think they released, does anyone know, a new iPhone or something? It was one of the MacBooks or the iPhones they released. They're like, we're not even going to allow it. We believe so much in some of the future of this web tech that we're just going to like cut it off. And anyone wants to play videos that run on an iPhone, then they have to use HTML5. They can't use Flash. That's a gross oversimplification, but you get the point. That was a very long-winded way of explaining that like they released new standards that can do new stuff with time. When will there be an HTML6? Well, you're going to see this pattern a bit sometimes. There's not really any big talk about an HTML6 because they just improved this stuff over time. These are just labels, right? Like the HTML standard has stuff added to it over time, but rather than these big kind of like massive, we're going to go add a whole bunch of stuff, like work on it for years and then smash it in, it's more like they're just constantly improving it. So think of it like now there's more like HTML 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, 5.11, 5.600, that kind of thing. Now, you can read more about it here, linked an article to Reddit. Reddit's fun. What version of CSS do we use? It's not 5. Who said 3? OK, 3. Yeah, good. So we use CSS 3. It was also released. I don't have it here. I don't know exactly when. They both kind of came out about the same time. Sorry. Oh, drafts. OK, that's a long time ago. It's hard to say because, yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. But like a lot of these things, again, they'll release a standard, but it takes browsers a long time to update it. CSS3 had a lot of stuff with it. It included a lot of things like border radius and box shadows and a whole bunch of other kind of pretty things. The way I described CSS3 was it was kind of the CSS standard that brought in a lot of the nuanced aesthetic things. You know, things like padding and borders and margins and widths and heights. That's been there since the beginning. But it brought in a lot of the stuff that was like really nice and cute. I used to tell people this story was because I used to do some web programming before CSS3 was kind of popularized, before you could add box shadows to things, right? That's what we added last Monday, Tuesday, whatever day it is today. And I used to tell people, if you wanted to have a box with a shadow in it, what you used to do was you used to go and basically, you'd make a div that would be like that, and then you would go and make a div here, and you would make a div here, and a div here, and a div here, and then you would make 4 little divs in the corner, right? You'd make 9 divs, and what you would do is these 4 divs on the corners, they would actually just be like a static image of a shadow. You would make it in Photoshop or something. These divs on the side here would be like this top one would be a 1 pixel high shadow, so like it would just be a little gradient, and you would just repeat that across the top, right? And then same on the sides, and then you'd have something that looks like a box with a shadow, but it's actually 9 divs within a div that kind of is constructed of various images. Tons of problems with that. You got to load the image, right? That's more bytes of bitmap images to bring through. And CSS3 kind of came along and was like, yeah, well, now we got a box shadow. So you can do all this stuff much, much easier. And there is going to be no next version of CSS3 as well, like a CSS4, because they're just improving that all the time, right? They do more and more with animations all the time. Like I'm pretty sure animations weren't in the very earliest versions of CSS3, as far as I remember, but they brought that in later. Any questions about that? It's just fun nuggets for today. OK. You lost the webcam. Damn. All right, that should be back now. No questions. Very sad. Really thought you'd have more, but that's OK. It's tiring. All right, so we're going to demo something. I'm usually pretty flexible with this because I like to prove that we don't plan this. I don't really have a mole in the students. I haven't paid a student $5 before the lecture to say, you know, put your hand up and say, I want to look at UNSW. So I like to kind of ask questions. What are websites you like, or websites that come to your mind? Now, some of them we can't do, but just tell me some. Throw them at me. Apple. It's always Apple. Yeah. Yeah, just because we looked at this earlier. So we're going to try and make something, probably not from the Apple site, because, again, I still think the Apple website is basically them just saying, like, we're going to pump the web browser so full of stuff that it's going to fall over. But yeah, it's definitely, it depends on the page. Sorry? Maybe Tesla? You guys and you're like, Tesla and Apple kind of the same thing. Tesla, that could be fun. Not really a lot of challenges there. Again, this is a good example. This is a website that's just relying on the fact that you have good bandwidth to run it, you know? Like the amount of, there's a lot of images on this web page. Who's seen the developer tools lecture? Dev tools? Who's watched the pre-recordings? Yeah? Put your hand up if you haven't watched All of these, the mandatory ones. Okay. Well, that's fine. You're adults. When you do go watch it, you can actually play around with some things. The lecture actually goes more into like using this little debugging tool with CSS, but a fun little thing you can do on the side is you can actually you can force your web browser, for instance, when you're developing to use a different internet speed. So I could say here, I want you to use 3G internet. Obviously, it's not actually using a 3D chip. It's just emulating the speeds associated with 3G. But if I do that and then I refresh the page, you'll actually see that this is the page, I think, now trying to load. So we're 6 seconds into loading now, 8 seconds into loading, 10, right? And then it's like, OK, there's my black site. And we're just going. So it's interesting because there's a lot of websites out there that are beautiful, but they're basically just saying, F anyone who doesn't have fast internet. If you can't afford fast internet, you can't afford our overpriced computers. That'll be like, there we go. There all the images are, or half the images. We're 40 seconds in now. We're nearly a minute in, and yeah, still nothing. That's just a fun fact. These aren't fun websites to code today because, again, they're mostly just images that makes them pretty. You saw how ugly that was without it. Yep. Twin Brew? I don't like the U. It was a student. I remember last term, I think it was, a student came and was like, can you go to this website? And it was this really pretty website. And then I was like, wow, how'd you find that? And he's like, I made it. And I was like, whoa. Very dramatic. Digital twins are real fabric. So let's say I'm trying to understand a website. I can see a lot of elements like this, and I'm like, OK, this kind of makes sense. Like, these could just be some CSS animations, this thing. You can do things a few ways. Maybe it's an element that they've got an animation where it rotates. Remember how we did our spinning image? Sometimes they might actually have like a GIF or a PNG or some kind of, moving in the image itself, right? Like a mini video, basically. This thing here, I'm going to guess is a video just because it looks so weird. Oh, there we go. Canvas. OK. So they're not really giving me a lot to work with. But at a glance, it kind of, so there's these other HTML elements called canvas. And a canvas is kind of, it's a little, and again, you would have seen it with the lectures. It's sort of like the SVG stuff. It allows you to draw graphics. So think of it like, same with SVGs. Canvases and SVGs, they're kind of like a sub-language where you can go and like describe and draw things here. So in this case, this isn't going to be a video. This is going to be some kind of sub-engine that works on the browser where someone has, I doubt they've hand done this. I'm not exactly sure how you would go and create that in a canvas. Unless, like, if they didn't get this off the shelf, my guess would be there's a mathematical model somewhere. Like, whenever you see stuff like this, someone kind of models what this material might look like mathematically, and then they spit out code, and then they paste code into something. But yeah, it's very trippy. If I go further down, obviously these balls themselves are also trying to run away. Yeah, so this one is not being super cooperative in terms of some pages can be a bit of a pain to figure out exactly what's going on. But this here, like you think about, OK, there's different ways you can do this one. This one's not as scary. Like, this thing is weird, right? Like, to be honest. This one here, OK, so different ways you could do this. If you were really, really lazy, you could obviously get a designer to go and kind of make this and make every variation of it. And as you scroll, it's just kind of like loading images progressively, like stop motion. But that would require a hell of a lot of images being loaded in, right? So unless those images are small, which, it's not the most high fidelity thing, which kind of makes me wonder. See how it's kind of a little grainy and pixelated? Whereas like this thing up here is like kind of beautiful, So I'm not exactly sure how they do that one. But yeah, the fact that it's kind of, as I scroll, it's like going frame by frame makes me think it's a lot simpler. But a lot of this stuff is probably done with canvases. This is pretty advanced stuff. Usually a company, like if you're working for somewhere and you have a website like this, they're not going to build it. They're not going to have engineers at the company make that. They're going to go to some kind of shop or contractor who will do that for them, right? Who will probably have like some kind of web developer on the team, but predominantly these will be 3D artists. So people who go study design and they go learn things like Adobe After Effects or some equivalent, particularly these 3D ones, because these are all 3D models, which makes them all look really cool. Another company that I remember that I saw a lot of, which is in my space, is this Wealthsimple site. If it's a similar thread, it's less intense, but this would be the same kind of thing. They've gone and done 3D models of these things here. In this case, it's a video though. So it's kind of hard to tell there, but it looks like they're basically playing a video, which is definitely going to be a little more lightweight. So you might get like a 3D artist to go and draw that and export it. I think they used to have more on the page, like down here. So these would all just be videos. So I'd say usually video is kind of the way to go with this stuff because it's just easier, you know? Like in general, there's only really a couple of bad reasons to not have your whole website just be images, right? Because you think about this, do you have to really do that in HTML? Can't you just like make that in a file and call it page.jpg and like put that in? That sounds like a good idea, right? The only downside to that, it's not great for mobile responsiveness if you need things to kind of adapt. It's not good for search engine optimization. Google can't read images, they need to read text. And then thirdly, it's usually just a lot of like kilobytes and megabytes being loaded. So for nice little videos like this, they're kind of fine because I bet if I go down to mobile, the video probably just gets smaller, you know? It's not like anything crazy, it's just a different size video. There's no images to scrape. And people would say, well, sure, it's a big video, but like it might be worth it. Like I'm not actually, like a website like this, like if we do this one on 3G as well, we're on 3G. Yeah, so that one loaded relatively quickly. That's probably the only other benefit of, if I go back to Twinbrew in a sec, because this site will take a second. This is a Canadian company. Yeah, the benefit of like this, I mean, these videos will still take a while to load. I'd be interested with Twinbrew because when you do things like canvas and SVGs and these like vector items, right? They're often very light. Characters don't really cost much. So if I make this 3G, and I'm just curious, I don't know, but if I try and refresh that page, I imagine that some of it might load quicker. I don't know. I've never seen this site before. Just kind of got to wait for that first load here, but it looks like it's trying to load a bunch of stuff. But they're all very heavy websites at the end of the day. Yeah, okay, this one's quite big. Even if it's canvas, even if it's text, things can still be quite a large size, right? Go check out the image types lecture if you haven't seen it. I think it's compulsory, is it? Or is it? No, it's not. Yeah, this one's a good lecture. We talk a lot about JPEGs, PNGs, SVGs, and things like that. Basically, there's a type of image called an SVG, because you kind of get, like an image is just a series of RGB colors, right? Something like that, like pixel, pixel, pixel. Maybe there's some compression involved, but maybe there's not. SVGs look like this. So when you see an SVG, it kind of looks like, just trying to find something bigger, it kind of just looks like code, you know, and it's actually instructions for the web browser to generate it, right? Whereas a normal image is just pixels that are getting slapped on the page, and SVG is instructions for it to render. Now the benefit of an SVG, I mean, you can go watch the lecture, but just to be really quick about it, the good thing about it being dynamic is that it's not a set number of pixels. So if I find like a random SVG somewhere, like say this banana, I hope that's an SVG. It's not. Someone's taken a bloody screenshot of an SVG. I'll go to a website. Google might not even want to show many SVGs. But if we look at some examples, rectangle with, yeah, okay, W3 schools. So this rectangle here, what's interesting about it as, you know, this isn't like, there's no pixel instructions. These are the instructions to make the rectangle. So if you zoom in really, really close on that, it looks still really high quality because like they can draw a perfect curve at any kind of zoom in or zoom out. Whereas when it's a pixel thing, you zoom in on an image that's a fixed number of pixels, it just has to get more pixelated. So SVGs have that benefit, and they're also a lot less code. You could never represent a blue JPEG this big with that little code. You know, the only downsides, though, are that it's a little more intense for the web browser a lot of the time. Because once the web browser does receive a JPEG or something like that, it's quite quick to display it, right? It's just put the pixels up. Whereas with SVGs, it actually has a little engine somewhere in the browser that has to run and like draw it and draw out a circle and everything like that. So really big SVGs can be a little bit more time consuming. Now, I don't think anyone has asked a question, but the screen has gone on lock. Yes. TwinBrew, so someone says TwinBrew is using 3.js. OK, so 3.js website. I think I've seen this a while ago. They help you make cool stuff. There's lots of things out there. This is the crazy thing about the web. It's like there's just stuff that people steal all the time. And not steal in a mean way, you know, because a lot of stuff's just open source or it's licensed in a certain way. Usually things will either be copyrighted, in which you have to pay for them. Sometimes things will be free to use, but they won't let you use them if you're going to make money off it. And other times it'll just be like, yeah, you can just use it as much as you want. Anything on like NPM's website is like that for the undergrads who are familiar with it. OK, let's find a website that's not kind of over the top, because everyone likes to be really dramatic. Samsons.kr. This is random. I'd type that in really too quickly. And that animation is added using theater.js, that camera motion, everything. Yeah, OK. This is really interesting stuff. So someone's pointing out there's another website called theater.js. Powerful motion design in the browser. They're going to have a video here to dramatically show you what all the cool things they can do is and how you can do it.
So that whenever the values of props change in theater, we just pass them.
Yeah, I imagine they're probably using HTML canvases behind the scenes. Very involved. There you go. Lots of cool stuff. This is the other thing. Stuff like this just happens all the time. I would love to read about this, but you get fatigued after a while, and you can only read so many things. This one actually does look kind of interesting, but you'll see all these kinds of, there's a new library for this, there's 7 different charting libraries, etc. OK, give me an interesting website that isn't over the top. Otherwise, we're going to have to make UNSW. That's kind of gross. It's very boring. I don't know who wrote that website. Probably not the uni. It's probably been outsourced. The Iconic. Ooh, is this the clothing thing? The Iconic. Yeah, this is good. Thank you. Camille. Giselle says, do letterbox. OK, I do want to have just a look. I'll just pick between these two. Social film discovery, tracks films that you've watched. Oh, this is a pretty good one as well. Oh, it's a tough one. All right, so we're going to have a quick vote. I won't tell you what part of the page we're going to do. Do we want to do the Iconic or Letterbox D? Hands up for Iconic. OK, Letterbox D. Why do you have such a strong opinion? Like, good job for putting your hand up, but like, I don't understand why that was like 50 to 1. That's weird. Like, I'm indifferent. So anyway, all right. Sorry, Camille. Now she's probably upset. It's not good. OK, so we're going to do something from this page here. If I can hopefully get rid of that ad. Stop seeing this ad. We will not show the ad again. Ad closed by Google. OK, fun couple of hacks while we're at it. You can right-click on this web page and obviously go to inspect. If you really don't like something, nothing stops you from, oh my god, it's back again. Nothing stops you from just right-clicking on it and deleting it. It's gone. Other fun fact, you can add one of my favorite tags, because you can edit. Again, this is in the lecture that you should have seen by now. But you can add some stuff here if I want to. Like, I can add an attribute. Where'd that go? Content editable. It's a fun little attribute. You don't need the equals HTML part. It can be like a void attribute. But this one's really cool because it lets you like click on parts of the website. And normally, let me just. Yeah, it lets you click on parts of the website and just be like, hello. So that's a fun little thing to do if you're bored. You can't really click on links or it'll take you to a new page, of course. But yeah, okay, let's get started then. So let's pick a part of this website. I'm going to pick these things here because this is really kind of complicated looking. You know, you don't need to kind of see me play around with some boxes. Now, the purpose of me showing you some of this is I want to give you a sense of like how to break down an element if you see it, because that's kind of the hardest part. Like, how do we actually get into it? I've got this file up here called index.html. It's just this file here. So I will just pull these up side by side so we can see them like this. Cool. And it's there. All right, so firstly, whenever I'm making something with HTML, I think usually, like, a good idea is often to go and break things up into just kind of block elements with divs and stuff. So if I see something like this, I start thinking about, okay, well, how will I naturally form this? It'll probably be like this whole top row here is a div. Then there's going to be a line of some sort. And then I'm going to have this whole bottom section's a div. And then there's clearly like a small left column over here. And then like a big right column on the right with more information. So if I'm making an HTML page, I usually won't start with all that HTML head title stuff. It just kind of, it might make you feel good, you know, like boilerplating things, being like, yep, look at me go. I'm 2 lines in everyone to my website. But I usually just start off and just start making things as they are, right? Just write it in straight like that. You don't have to put in everything, but in this case, I will start trying to write it in. What I will do here is I'll just kind of put in the text, popular reviews this week, span, and I'll put in another span. Now remember, spans are like divs, except they're not block elements. So much of HTML you write is going to be divs or spans. They're kind of like these generic building blocks. They're like blank canvases. Now, spans, when we say they're not block elements, what that means is, remember, a div wants to fill whatever you put in it, plus take up the entire right, well, as far as you see, fill up the entire element, plus take up the whole right-hand side, and then go to a new line. The very simple demonstration of that is if I have 3 divs like this, or 4 divs like this, right? They're going to look like that. Whereas if I have 4 spans like this, they're going to look like that. Because in the div cases, the divs are trying to suck up the entire new line to your right, like this, and use everything there. So I will, if I undo all that, here, I'm just using spans because I don't really want these 2 elements to take up the whole line. And I can always go change the tags later as well. So I've got that one div there. I'm going to go do a horizontal rule, like a new line. I might not keep that either. And then I'm going to go make a new div for the images. Now, inside this div, I might also have 2 divs called image, and the other one is called everything else. And I might write that, and I might start there. Now, that doesn't really look like the web page at all at this point, you know? But I've got a few of the key elements down, and I might try and start playing with things. Firstly, when it comes to this image and everything else part, there's a few different ways that you can do layouts, right? You can always use tables to solve problems. People don't really do that much. You got your classic kind of like table, table row, table cell, you know, things like this. The best thing I've ever read about tables is that tables are for tabular data. That's a quote I love. And what that means is, like, if this isn't what you would use a table for, don't use a table for it, which sounds kind of tautological, but it's like, if it's not data, or like, you know what I mean? Like, if it's not actually tabular data, something that you might put in Excel, don't go near tables for the layout. Tables were very good in the early days of the web before CSS was advanced, because like they were kind of the only way you could structure stuff. But the way things end up now, if you've seen the lecture, is we have 3 kind of ways to do things. We have 2 old school ones, which is our position relative or position absolute, playing around with that. We have our float lefts and our float rights, like this. And we also have our new ones, which is our display flexes. Now, flex is by far the most powerful. You can do like a million things with flex, and it's the newest thing in terms of layout, probably like in the last 10 years, something around that. But it is a lot more complicated. If you've seen it, there's flex. There's like the whole Flex Frog website. What is it called? Flex Frog. Oh yeah, the top one. Where like you literally can go through tutorials where you're like, my pond, I need to figure out how to move. Who's seen this? A few of you, right? I have to figure out how to move my frog to here, which basically means what CSS do I write to get the frog to be on the right-hand side. Well, I probably tell it that all my elements should start at the end of the line. So I say, you know, justify content flex end. The frog moved, you know. But the thing is, I like flex is cool. I use it a lot, but also it kind of stresses me out because there's so much stuff to it, you know. So if I'm trying to solve a problem quickly, sometimes I'll stay away from it. Yeah. But we'll do a couple of examples. So for this one, if you ever want to create an area that uses flex, you have to give the wrapper the one really simple CSS display flex like that. So you always give that display flex to the wrapper, the element that captures the things that you want to organize. That will usually rearrange things slightly. Flex has a whole bunch of default behaviors. In this case, its default behavior is everything in a display flex thing, basically all of these, if I make many of them, it's just going to try and stack them out like columns. You can make it stack them out like rows. You can make it stack them out like columns the other way around. If you remember the froggy thing, I could say justify content flex end like that, and it'll, is it flex end? What was it? What did I do wrong there? Flex end, flex start. I don't know. I'm losing the plot. That's okay. You can usually Yeah, so this is the thing. This is why I hate flex, because I just did a really stupid thing. So it's like flex has all these rules. It'll be like, when you have elements, do you want them to kind of shift to the right or shift to the left? But then there's also other ones that do you want them to start from the right and start from the left? So here it's like starting from the left, but you want everything kind of shifted to the right. You can do all these kinds of combinations. So again, super powerful. But here I only really need two things. I don't need it to the right. And what I want to do is I want to say, well, actually, I really like this image to be 1 unit of space, and I'd really like this other thing to be 5 units of space. And what this will basically do is put the image and everything else in like a 1:5 ratio. That's what's happening there. So if I want it to be a 2:5 ratio, I can go and do that and play around with it that way. You can also do something where you just say, I want this to be a fixed width of like 100 pixels, and I want the other side to just be whatever. You don't even need this, and Flex will just figure it out. And it'll put the image there, and everything else will just kind of come after it. So that when I make my page bigger, see in that case how it doesn't change kind of size? Whereas if I did what I had before with this, it's going to change size because it's ratios. You know, so one of them was fixed and one of them was ratios. Now, if you have images, generally with images, things tend to be a lot more fixed because images themselves are naturally fixed in size. So it kind of depends on what you're dealing with. But here already I've done a little bit. But up the top here, I've kind of got my popular reviews this week and more on different sides. You can solve this one a few different ways as well. You could do flex if you want to. The thing I'm actually going to do here is I'm actually going to use floats. Floats are a funny thing. I generally would discourage them because I think they'll confuse you. Like that. That doesn't make sense, right? What floats do, everyone here has used Microsoft Word before, right? You know when you get an image and it kind of like dumps itself on the page and it like separates all the text. So you've got all this text and then your image and then all the new text. And then you change that setting where it kind of like floats over the text. The text, I think they call it wrap, like wrap text or something. And suddenly the image kind of floats above it and everything else just kind of gently wraps around it. That's basically what float is. So it isn't anything more complicated than what you can do in Microsoft Word. So what actually is happening here is you kind of like, imagine you're in Word and popular reviews this week and more images. You kind of told one to kind of like float above everything on the left, then float above everything on the right, and everything else can just kind of fill in the gaps. It's very confusing. Usually the way that you deal with floats is, well, if I just copy and paste this for a second, I'll give you a quick example. Let's say I have a float left, and it's going to be a 50 by 50 box, and I'm going to make it blue. Really simple box. Sorry, just having a moment with my computer. There's a box, right? Now, if I have a whole bunch of content, it just wraps around the box. That's all floating does. If I move it to the right, it goes to the right. If I don't make it float, the div just occupies the entire line. It's just like Microsoft Word. However, if I make it here, like this, and I want it to kind of force it down onto the next line, I can usually include a tag that looks like this. It's called clear both, or clear left, you can do either. But here's a common one. That's basically saying, all right, whatever's floating, just get to the bottom of it, and then let's start again. So that's what that'll do in that case, this kind of random line. So we could use a similar thing if we wanted to. Come back to our code here. I could say, yep, well, at the bottom of that, I'm going to make a new div. It's going to say clear both. And now suddenly it'll kind of look like this. Now here's the funny thing. I told you last week I'd do some stuff with ChatGPT, right? And we didn't, because I let you down, you know. But I want to do a little bit today, because I can't express to you, and I don't know, again, if this will work. I try not to preempt too much in these lectures, because I just think it doesn't make them as authentic, and that's not some cop-out. But let's say, like, I'm like, hi, ChatGPT, I'm really stressed. Hayden set an assignment, and I'm not sure what to do. Now, you don't have to go to this depth, but I'm just trying to describe. Some people overthink. It's not Google, right? I am trying to get started on a page, but my top elements, popular reviews this week and more, seem to kind of mesh with the rest of the content as opposed to being separated. Here is the code. Is that it? Yeah. Yeah. Shut up. Yeah. Now, here's the interesting thing. You wouldn't go and copy and paste this, you know? That's not how you should learn, necessarily. But what you notice is, like, as you look at this, you suddenly see a new line here, right? We didn't add that in. That's not in our code, is it? So rather than you having to get caught up trying to understand every single little detail of float, I kind of just generally described my problem to ChatGPT. I gave it a little bit of code, and it kind of helped me along. It added borders here. It didn't like the HR. I don't know why I did that. That'll probably result in like a weird double line, I'm guessing, just looking at it. Yeah, it's like a weird double line, because it's like adding a border to the bottom, and there's an HR there. But, you know, that's really helpful. You know, you go further. You could be like, can you stop adding CSS that I didn't add, please? And you'll probably, again, it'll probably, yeah, there you go. See what I mean? Like, talk to it. I know this sounds silly, but it's like, it's a useful tool as a companion, right? It's not a contract. It's not, you don't contract out your work to it. You ask it questions, you get some help. That's really great. Clear the floats. It's like, you know, you could just, you know what I mean? What does clear the floats mean? Now, I know this isn't free either. I'm using my work account for this one. I forget that sometimes because I'm so used to it now. But it can still be quite useful. Clear both. There we go. Sweet. More. You don't need that in there. There's your image and everything else. Cool. Now, back to this. These are obviously different sizes, and they have, I'm going to get rid of that content editable thing, because that's kind of screwing me up now. Elements. Cool. That's a link. OK, great. So they're both links. They have different text sizes. So now I've got to go play with the text sizes. Well, I would say that in this particular case, this one might be like a 0.8 EM. Now, if you remember from the fonts lecture, which I don't remember if it's compulsory or not, but generally the best way to do fonts is go and use EMs. So like 1 EM is just like one normal font size. 0.5 EM is like half font size. 2 EMs double font size. So use it as a ratio. There's a little lecture on why it's good to do that way rather than using PTs. I think a lot of us gravitate towards using PT, like 20 PT and stuff, just because it's in all the editors and things we use, again, like Microsoft Word or Excel or Google Sheets or Google Docs. But EM's kind of the way to go there. So now I've got that looking a little bit like that. Obviously, the exact size isn't perfect, but I'm also kind of zoomed out on this one here too. And the fonts aren't going to be perfect either. But naturally, you'll find a lot of web pages, their fonts will, if you want to do something quickly, usually Arial's a good thing. Because browsers, for some reason I don't fully understand, still default all text to Times New Roman, even though it's basically never used. Where's Times New Roman used on the internet? Someone tell me. New York Times, right? News websites. New York Times. I don't know if there's a scientific reason they do it, but I think it gives old newspapery vibes is the main thing. And that's why it's on a lot of these websites. But you won't see it, it's on websites to be clear, but the vast majority of websites will look more like, oops, that was not even remotely valid CSS. Most websites will look a lot more like this. And this is where you would then go through the process of playing around with this. Now, every different type of layout you do, I use the floats here. They all have slight problems with one another. An example with the floats is that this more here kind of might feel like it's in the wrong spot. Now, that makes sense because structurally, what's going to be happening here, I probably zoomed in too far, is if I inspect this part here, I look at the div, you see that like those divs, I probably can't quite tell, but they're probably starting at the same point. Like the browser's putting the top of the div at the same point. So if I make the font size of your right one smaller, it's just going to do that. So now it's going to kind of look uneven at this stage, which you don't really experience on the website itself, right? Like this website, they kind of more look like the bottom of it's aligned. Now, again, not to really hammer this point home, but if I say, how do I get the text in more to be aligned vertically with the text in the popular reviews this week? I don't know if this will be helpful. We will see. Use the line height. I don't know. Let's try that. I've actually never thought about doing that before. I have no sense if that will work. Line height tells you how much each line of text will occupy. I don't know if has that actually solved it? Yeah. There you go. It's interesting. I feel like, I don't know, it's hard to tell. I'd need to look at it. But I mean, that's a lot better regardless, it's not kind of shoved up the top. Different layouts will cause different things to happen there. Everything's really weird. I think that's one of the hardest things about web dev stuff is that some things just don't make sense and it's not really obvious. Like a good example is spans don't really have margins as a general rule, because a span by definition only occupies the space that it has. So if we play around with just some stuff unrelated, if I say div here, hi, and I make a few divs, and I give each div, say, a margin top of 10 pixels, right? A few of them like that. And then I increase that to, say, 20 pixels. It all kind of gets more space. Spans, I got to just make sure I'm not wrong here. Spans are weird. They don't really behave. They don't really care about margins. You could say, yeah, I've got a margin top of 50 pixels. I don't care. You could have a margin left of 50 pixels. Seems to work, that one, And I think for me, if someone was like, why is CSS, like, even though it's easy, it's like, why is it hard? It's because it's not like there's some universal rule where everything follows the exact same pattern. Everything's quite deterministic, like you'd all get the same result. But there's some oddities to it that aren't strictly always intuitive. But that's enough on that topic. Question, would dividing the two different text into two flex boxes and aligning them separately be a bad approach? No, that's totally fine. That's probably like flex, you can pretty much solve every problem you have with layout with flex. It's just a question of how much flex code you have to write. And it's usually a good idea. This is just me I'd probably do this with flex if you weren't here. I'm just trying to like touch on a few different things. So there's my image and everything else. Now I've got my little thing here. Hopefully I wonder if I can steal that image straight into my web page for you. Maybe. What's that? Image source. Yay. So I'm going to go replace this one, this image here. We'll go do image source as that. See if it pops up. Perfect. Then I've also got a whole bunch of text. I'm actually probably just going to go copy and paste that because I feel like I'm wasting some time now. So everything else here. Now I'd probably go and create some more divs in this case. So a great idea is you should go and you put a div there. You put, what does it look like again? Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice. Is the movie actually got two Beetlejuice names in it? Is that because people say it?
People say it 3 times and then he appears.
Oh, so you only say it twice.
Movie, yeah.
Oh.
It's a sequel.
Oh. There you go. But, sorry, I saw the trailer the other day, but I haven't seen the original movie. And is it the same actor in it?
Yeah, for the Beetlejuice.
That's pretty cool.
The original one's better.
Yeah, okay. There you go. Learn things. So, yeah, I've got that there. Now, usually what I do is divs are great to break up things by lines. So I've got like one line here, and you kind of start like this. The next line I can put the like Sydney. I've got a rocket ship. Thankfully, a lot of things these days are emojis. Those stars are definitely not emojis, I don't think. I haven't really seen that star emoji. So that's like kind of a question mark for me. And then I have another thing and then a 58. Okay, and then I've got text here. I get it, Tim, if I was dating Monica Bellucci. Okay, that's weird. And then I've got another div with a love heart. Now, even if you were making a dynamic site, you would often still build it this way, where you would go and put in a lot of the static content and you get it shaped for the right look, and then you would go and kind of cut out the actual text and be like, we're going to insert a dynamic element here later. Now, obviously, this looks like really bad. And there's not really much of a way around it except, well, I mean, obviously, I'm kind of zoomed out there. But this is where you would just kind of have to say, well, this one is probably going to be color white. And now we have to kind of get into like, how does the page look? Because the whole page probably needs to be like a certain color. See how it looks? That's not dark enough. I'll probably make all the text white, actually. Yeah, that'll do. Now, a couple of things to note here about building pages quickly. One thing, you've probably noticed that I've been doing a lot of inline styles. Inline styles are bad. They don't really adhere to the style guide, but it's quite onerous if you're just trying to get a few things done to go and abstract everything out. Because sometimes half the styles you write, you like rip apart anyway, you know, and, like throw them in the bin. So don't force yourself to like over style it as you go. Like over clean up the styles as you go. I think the only time it really helps is when you have a lot of repeated elements, because it's sometimes just nicer to modify them in one spot. But so far, everything here has been pretty boutique. The other fun little tip I have for people is, you all know hexadecimal, right? Right? It's this, if you remember it. Nope. It's that. Now, this is a really quick way to get grays. This is white. This is black. That's all you really have to remember. Everything else in between is a shade. So if you want black, it's just 6 zeros, or 3 for short, but let's call it 6. And if you want white, it's just that. And if you want anything in between, you can just kind of do it quickly. So that's what I did here, is I was like, well, 3 is pretty close to 0, so it gets me like a pretty dark-looking thing. But it's nowhere near dark enough, so I'll just go 1 and be like, yeah, it's kind of good for now. I should obviously go and get that right later, but again, I can do that after. That's the gist for now. Similarly, a lot of this text here, I'd be like, well, a lot of the text actually seems like it's kind of gray. OK, that gets me a little bit closer. And then if I do go back to my div here and I add back a color white like that, that also will get me a little bit kind of closer there. You'll also see that now that I look at these fonts, it's a little bit complicated because some of the fonts are these kinds of serif fonts and some are sans serif fonts. So some kind of look like Times New Roman and some don't. So I might think, OK, I'm just going to assume my page by default is Arial, but then I might make a couple of extra elements like, say, this one, Times New Roman. I actually have never written that before. I've always spent my entire life trying to get rid of it, and I've never added it back. Seems fine. Obviously, it's not quite right. Obviously, you can have a look at the font on this page. It's hard to tell. Sometimes fonts don't seem totally normal. Like in this case, where is it? There it is. Where is it? Font family inherit. Oh, I hate that one. There's always so much stuff here. I'm sure it'll be around. Doesn't really matter at all. But the point is that this, you might look at your one and think, oh, that doesn't quite look the same, but you'd be amazed what happens if you, say, increase the font size just a little bit, say 1.5 times the normal size, and then you make it bold as well. It's not the best, but it's a lot closer, you know. Obviously, too, coding for you is not going to be as miserable as this. This screen is downscaled for the lecture projector. And most of you probably have like 2 screens or a big screen somewhere at home. OK, so I've got a few more things here. I've got that text. I've got that love heart. Let's see what they're actually doing with the love heart. It's probably an image, but I'm not too sure. Oh, it's SVG, is it? So many different ways that I could be wrong, but it looks to me like they've got this. Yep, there you go. There's an SVG here. Now this love heart, this is actually what I was trying to show you before. Look at how, see when I zoom in on that, how it doesn't really look more pixelated? Like that's a tiny image, right? If that was only 10 by 10 pixels, if I zoomed in on that the whole way, you'd be able to see the whole pixels. I'll give you an example. Let's say I go look up a tiny heart. Something really, really small, like that. Now if I go make that full size here and I zoom in all the way, you'll see that you can kind of start to see. Browsers are actually pretty good at it. They'll kind of blur it with some like intelligent math. But that looks way better than, kind of doesn't, but you get the point. So that's actually an SVG. It's not an image. It's not bitmaps. I could probably go look at the code. I think there's the code. So someone has drawn an SVG that looks like a heart. Oh, it's a great idea. Draw me an SVG that looks like a broken heart. I don't know. Because that's probably a lot more just getting bigger. Well, it's quite complicated, you know. Like you can kind of model a normal SVG. Is you done? OK. Then we can go put that on our web page if we want to. Well, I guess they did give me what I asked for. It's pretty funny. That was getting weird. Anyway, point is, so what they've got on the website here, it's very kind of, I wouldn't, you know, it's not really smart or not smart, but this here is an element. It's just a link. But what they've done is they've basically gone and put a background on that element, right? So instead of putting an image in the background, they put an SVG in the background, which is a type of image. And it just so happens that image only takes up, you know, 15, 16 pixels. So it kind of sits there. So we could go do that ourselves if we wanted to. I could go and steal this. We don't have to do the background image thing. We could just copy out of HTML, I think. So here I could just go and be like, there's my SVG, and put this in a span, like that. And it might look OK, like that. You have to play with it. But that's just me. I don't need to do the background image thing. I'm just including the image directly and then the likes as well. We'll probably see them do a similar thing, because again, this will be an emoji. I just know what that rocket emoji looks like. Though a lot of these probably look like they might be SVGs as well. This one is an SVG too. Here's a fun one for you. I don't think you really need to do this much anymore. But so this is kind of old school. Browsers have a limit as to the number of concurrent requests that they're happy to make to a web server. Browser concurrent limit request. Also, I'm just trying to plow through on the time. I usually find with night lectures that people just want to go home, if that makes sense. So if you're restless, bear with me. Yeah, so browsers have a certain number of connections that they can do. I don't think they're going to tell me here. But it's something like nowadays, some of the browsers have a lot more. It used to be 2, was a lot of them. Still is 2 for some of them, to be honest. I think one of them, Edge or something, now does like a lot more. But this means if you have a website and you have like 100 different icons that are different SVGs, and the web browser has to do a lot of image source, image source, image source. It can't do them all concurrently. It's going to have to serialize it in some way, because it can only do like 6 at a time, for instance. So a common way, if you have a website that's super, super heavy in terms of like all these little icons, what they'll typically do is they'll typically go and get one big image, or this one's an SVG, that has all the icons on it, and they'll load it once, and then when they're putting these images on the page or putting them in the background, they'll basically just like choose a certain size and position, like a lookup, and be like, okay, this tiny section of the image goes here. And that's what they've done here. So for instance, these green stars here, this is an SVG, and this is a great example, because see how none of this looks too pixelated as I zoom in? It's because it's all drawn, it's all vectorized. These stars here, or whatever ones they use, they'll just be including those on the page at that point. Yeah, there'll be the CSS for it somewhere. Yeah. There's a question that I missed. Can we use AI during the final or only Google things? Edge seems to have started using Copilot to sum up things you put on the search bar. This is a great question. I don't know yet. I know I said that last week. I'm still trying to figure it out. I said assume not because the short answer is that I think the way we write the final exam is so explicit that you could probably actually dump it into ChatGPT and get an answer, right? Because of that, there might be an element where we don't allow LLMs for the final exam, but that's because it's much simpler. Like, to be clear, the final exam is going to be the easiest assessment you do in the course. Because like this is hard, assignment 2 and 3 are really big. The exam's like 3 hours of coding. You know what I mean? Like, how much can we ask you to do? So I'm not sure yet. I'm erring on the side of caution. That was the question that I got asked. Now, when I mentioned about the break thing, I heard a bunch of you sigh quietly. So we're going to take a short break, bring you back to life. And then we'll keep going on this. We'll keep picking at it. I'm not going to finish it because you can obviously take this to the nth degree. But go stretch your legs. We'll get started up at 7:15 and then keep going. I won't spend much longer on this because it's always like, whenever we do these evening lectures, there's always like 10% of people that just leave at the break, which I get. I wouldn't even be here in the first place if I were you, probably. But I'm always like, you just know that they've decided that what you have to say next is just not as important. Really like dampens you. So I'm going to chat just a little bit more about this, because the thing is, I could spend the next half an hour trying to get this pixel perfect, but the point of it is just to kind of give you a sense of how I would approach it. So a couple more details with this. Firstly, the Beetlejuice 2024. Obviously, here, what I would do is that instead of just having Beetlejuice 2024, usually for something like this, you would just go and break them up with 2 spans. You would just have this in one span, that in another, and then you could extract the parts that were really specific here to just that span, because obviously that was the stuff that was kind of to do with the header. And now we'll see it kind of looks like that straight away. OK, well, that's pretty easy. Then the other stuff, we've got a little icon here. This one actually looks like just an image straight away. It's really interesting, though, because that's a square. The other one's a circle. How do we do that? How do we make that a circle? Yeah? Someone said that here, too. That was you? OK. Cool. Border radius, yeah. So an easy one is if you have an image that's 10 by 10 pixels and you give it a border radius of 5, the radii will naturally hit each other and it'll form a perfect circle. So if I just take this one, for instance, and I go, well, let's go and add that in front of the Sydney, because I know that was here. Image source equals that. It should come up as square. OK, it's too big. I can obviously style it to be smaller. As a general rule, browsers, if you give it a width without a height, it will auto the height. It'll do a height that's just based on the same aspect ratio. But I could also say, yeah, border radius, I don't know, 12 pixels. Now it's a circle. Pretty handy. In general, with images, there's 2 ways that we can add an image. The usual way is with an image tag, like image source. The other way is that we do it with a div background. So for instance, here, if I got rid of that, I could also instead say div style equals like width 25 pixels, height 25 pixels, background. URL that. That's another way I can do it. Div backgrounds, okay, so here's the thing. Div backgrounds, pros of div backgrounds, they're a really great way to put an image there if you're going to put it behind stuff, you know? Say I want to put text over this image here. I wouldn't use an image source. I might use like a div background. That's the pros. The cons are that it's a lot harder to work with. Because by default here, what I've actually said is that, hey, the div has a 25 by 25 pixel shape, but the image is just the normal size. So now I have to say background size is 25 pixels by 25 pixels. And I probably did that. Did I do that wrong? I don't even know if that's how I do it. I probably have to do it in here. Like that. And even then, I don't think I've... OK, so quick tangent here. I mentioned this in the CSS lecture. But remember that there are things we have out there like padding top, padding bottom, padding left, and padding right. Now, you can simplify this, if you want to, into padding 10 pixel. I did that the wrong way. Padding 10 pixel, 20 pixel. If they're all the same padding, you can simplify it further into just 10 pixel, padding 10 pixel. You know, this one applies to the top, bottom, left, right. This one applies to top, bottom, left, right. You have the same thing with backgrounds. You can say background image as a URL there. Background size is X pixels, Y pixels. Background position is X pixels, Y pixels. Background repeat is no repeat, right? There's all these background dash properties, but whenever you use a background by itself and just stuff, it's these compound values. And that makes it really tricky, because what was happening here was I was writing background size 25 pixel, 25 pixel, and then the next attribute here, this background, which kind of covers all the properties as a shorthand, was kind of overriding it for me, I think. I'm pretty sure that's what was happening. So then I'm like, oh, try and put this in here. But this is actually the background position, which is why the background looks really weird, because I basically told it to like reposition the background. So anyway, the point of all that is, my advice to you is, whenever you're using compound stuff, don't, and just use explicit things like this, background image, because now I can come along better, I think, and say background size like that. There you go. Right? So try to avoid the compound stuff when you're getting started, because if you don't know the exact ordering of how it all goes, it's just going to kind of give you pain. But you can do the background image there. One of the problems with that is you think, oh my god, it's a div, so now it needs the whole line. Oh no. You could do a few things there. You could obviously float it left again, but do that at your own discretion. Like, that can cause problems. You could actually say, I don't need it to be a div, I'll just make it a span. Ah, it's gone. That's not good. As a general rule, spans suck for everything that isn't text. If it's not text, stay away from the spans, because it just doesn't kind of behave as intuitive. Like, this is what I was saying earlier. It's like, why is it gone? I gave it a width and a height. Usually that's the reason things don't exist. You know, like for instance, if this was a div and I didn't give it a width and a height, where is it now? It's nowhere, because there's nothing in the div, so the div doesn't need a width. But if I put content there, the image is there suddenly. And the default behavior of images with CSS's background images is that they repeat. So if the div's really long and the image is really small, it's just going to repeat that, like tessellate it across. So again, use the point of all of this is, like, unless you really need to do something smart, just keep it simple. Go back to that. Nice little image there. Now, obviously, we can go find these icons and include them. We can go and play around with paddings and font sizes and colors and stuff. But that's kind of the gist of it. I'll take this as far as you guys want me to, but I feel like I've given you all the unique stuff so far. So please ask some questions if you have some. I'll also pull this back up on the screen, because it's kind of at the point where, oops, it's kind of at the point where you might have some more questions. Is it better to use section over div? The tutorial video suggested section. Yeah, like there's lots of these HTML tags, like header, like you have like, I think it's like you have like nav and header and footer and section and all these kinds of things that don't mean a lot. The reason they're useful is because there's a couple things. One is obviously it tells programmers a little more what something's about, right? Rather than death by divs. There's just divs everywhere. You just kind of get, I don't really know what it's about. The other thing is it helps things like web browsers, search engines understand what's on your website. So for instance, like let's say, what's a really popular website people use all the time? Wikipedia, right? See this here? I don't remember off the top of my head how this is formed, but see how Wikipedia gets a cute little breakdown? As an example, not literally, Google might look at that web page and look for anything inside the nav tag and be like, well, there's the navigation for the site, so I'll infer that that's where I can scrape that from. A lot of web stuff has to do with Google scraping things, frankly. We don't talk about it much in this course because it's not really critical to the fundamental understandings, but a lot of the nuance will kind of come from that. Other things sometimes might be like screen readers or other applications that are trying to make sense of what's going on in the page. It's just more meaning. You're just adding meaning to pages. So yeah, you should do that if it means that. Like if it's actually your website footer, you should use a footer tag. But you don't have to start like that. They don't really have any practical benefit, and they kind of just slow you down in general. Other questions? Happy Mid-Autumn Festival. I hope this isn't a really ignorant question, but what is that? Is that an actual thing? Mood cakes. Oh yeah, no, yeah. Oh yes. I was talking about mooncakes with my employees today. That's related to, okay, it's all clicking now. And this is also because we're in the southern hemisphere. And yeah, right, because it's mid-autumn somewhere else right now. Perfect, I'm following. Thank you for educating me. Can I use flex instead of float as it's more intuitive? Yes, no, generally speaking, I would steer away from floats and I would steer away from position absolutes or relative. They usually confuse people more than they help. The only, I would go, unless it's cellular data, go tables. If you need an element to literally stay at the top of a website, do position fixed. Right? Classic one here would be like height 100 pixels, width 100%, background red. And then I'm going to put like a skull emoji. Like a lot of them. There we go. What that'll do for me is that'll get me this up the top of my page, where even if I scroll up and down, it stays there. That's a position. Let me get rid of this stuff. That's a position fixed. There are some use cases for that, that actually kind of matter. Header bars, footer bars are the most common ones, sidebars. Besides cellular, cell-based data for table or position fixed, you should pretty much just look to flex for all your other problems that you face. Because, yeah, that's what I would say. Also, one thing I don't think I communicated very well to you all today, because this example that we picked was it wasn't very blocky, is that a great way to build pages is just with divs and colors. So if I kind of take a quick break from this for a second, maybe I'll make another file called index2.html. Colored blocks? I don't know. I'm trying to see if I can steal some inspiration quickly. No, that was not really going to work for me. Is if I'm trying to say make, maybe I want to make some blocks, I'll use the JS Paint thing. Let's imagine that I'm like, well, I'd really like to, have that, and then inside I want to have this, and then inside that I want to kind of have this, and then inside that I kind of want to have this. Let's say I had to draw that. Even if they didn't have colors, that could be a web page. That doesn't look that far from a web page in terms of the general structure. Usually what I'll do is I'll kind of start out and be like, well, you can make everything flex, display flex, and I'll just kind of say yep, well, I got my my left and my right-hand side. Okay, so I want to get this left-hand column, and then I want to get all of this as a part 2 there. But the thing is, left and right doesn't really, even if I gave it, flex 1 and say flex 4, I can't really tell what it's doing. So a great thing to do is just go and add backgrounds to everything. Some really harsh, blunt colors like that. And now you kind of know how big it's going to be. Height 100%. There we go. And then I think, well, now I kind of need to do this next bit where I kind of want to have this top section and then a bottom section. So now on this right-hand side here, I'll just kind of go, well, this itself also needs to display flex because it's containing elements. This one will have a background of yellow. And let me just zoom out slightly. Yep, it's going to have a background of yellow and then another one of purple. And I would really like it, if I'm looking at this image here, that this one looks like it's in about a 3:1 ratio. So I'll say flex 3, and this one will be flex 1. And I will need to kind of give them, they probably don't need a height yet, but something like this. And I'm like, oh, okay. Seems to work fine. But then I realized, well, that isn't kind of working fine because I've done it the wrong way. I probably need to instead be like, I've got this block up the top, and then I've got this block down the bottom. So then I think, damn it. Well, now I go div style as something. So there's my top bit, and then my bottom bit's going to be here. Well, actually, they're going to be in different things, right? But the point is, already without these colors, I would be like really bloody confused, is the main point. And also, these kinds of structures are just generally really confusing. But let me just pull up where it's at the moment. So think about it for a sec. We have our red on the left, we have our blue on the right. Then what I've tried to do is I want to be able to say, hey, I have a top section and a bottom section. This is also why you probably shouldn't jump to conclusions. Forget the blue and yellow and purple. I probably screwed all that up. There's our yellow and purple. But I want the yellow to be the whole top bit, and I want this to be the whole bottom bit. But they're going left to right. Help. Flex for going top to bottom instead of left to right. Flex direction. Hello. Looks good. Okay. Maybe I bumped it. Yeah, so now we just go and do 2 of these each. Display flex. Hello? That seems okay. Obviously, you all don't need to hear me too much. So, yes. Okay, so here we have our white and our black, but we kind of need to give them flex ratios, you know, because this top one here, this is actually going to be a 3:1 ratio, it looks like. And the other one's going to be a 1:3 ratio. So flex 1, flex 3 like this. And there starts to be our page. Gray. There you go, right? The colors are really, really helpful. So if you're ever doing block stuff, I mean, I made that look go from kind of cute to ugly looking pretty quick, but if you're ever doing block stuff, definitely try and do a bit with colors. It'll help you out a significant amount. You also saw that ChatGPT thing. I thought about this a lot because, you know, I'm always kind of like, what happens if things like LLMs turn you all into idiots, right? And I thought, I think one of the biggest motivators you should have to learn is that you really need to know what to ask, frankly. Like, I can get really quick answers out of it because I kind of know how to talk about it, you know? And I find one of the ironies, I think, of all this ChatGPT stuff is that it's kind of like a weird full circle where, like, if you can't express yourself with English, you actually kind of get impaired more. You know, like Google kind of went more towards this like really robotic, like, you know, HTML can't align box. You know, it was very like reductive. And now we're getting rewarded, it seems, for being more descriptive and knowing how to talk about stuff. So that's probably just one general philosophical point I'd make is like, if you know your stuff, you're going to know how to extract information out of these things and really describe the problems and interpret the answers really quick. Like I really actually, like I needed to search this up. That wasn't a ploy. I was like, I don't remember what that is. But again, I knew what to ask. I got the answer straight away. So, yep. Is it better to use divs and spans for text or the P and H tags? I'm not sure what you mean by H tag. Oh, H tags for headers. Yeah, so if I was doing this, what I would go, this is back to the previous one. I would go back through it once I was happy with it and I'd say, you know what? This really looks like an H1. The downside of that though, or an H3 or something. The downside of that though is sometimes it has unwanted side effects. So for instance, at H3 and a lot of the H's by default, they're block elements, which means that they all come with these two properties, display block and typically some kind of margin or padding. That's like baked into a lot of them. So sometimes you might have to like display in line and be like margin 0 or whatever. I mean, that'll probably handle it for us. Display in line and it's back to normal. But yes, you should generally use H tags or P tags for things because they just mean more. P tags, I'd say, aren't used a whole bunch anymore. P stands for paragraph. Again, a lot of the early internet, I keep using Wikipedia as the reference and be like, the early internet was a lot like Wikipedia. There was a lot of paragraphs in it because it was just a text dump, you know, on the internet. But nowadays, again, like you go to Tesla, go to their website and it's like, where's the paragraphs? It's just pictures of cars and solar panels. Yeah, here's some paragraphs. Are they using P tags here? Hopefully. This is a great application of P tags. P tags, perfect. Yeah, there you go. So yeah, if you're using actual paragraphs, you should. But generally speaking, like I would define a paragraph as, you know, a piece of text that is probably over a line and contains text next to it that is also, like, that is right next to it, if that makes sense. Like if you just have a random piece of text on the website, like this, even if it's not a title. Like I wouldn't make this a P tag. I wouldn't make like any of these a P tag. They're not really paragraphs of text, are they? You know, that's the cool thing about the HTML tags is you don't have to overthink it. Is this a header of some sort? Is this a paragraph? Would a reasonable person call this a, you know, paragraph? I'd be like, probably not. It's just text. Like if you said to someone, write me some paragraphs about the Model X, and they wrote you that, you'd be like, that's not paragraphs, is it? It's just some stuff. And if you said to someone to write you a header and they wrote that, you'd be like, good job. You wrote a header. Cool. What other questions do you have about any of this we've gone through? Yeah.
When you draw a SVG and as you like changing the size of the window, does the browser compile that when you like change the window size? Since when you zoom in the pixel.
Yeah. So when you when you have an SVG on the page, like we saw some earlier, and you zoom in, does the browser recompile it? Was kind of the question. I don't really know like the technical description of it. It's going to re-render it. I mean, because the browser is in a constant state of like painting, you know, on your, like when I say painting, it's like drawing stuff on the page. So it probably has to redraw it slightly. It probably has some smart ways to redraw it, no doubt, because all these things are massively built by very, very smart people. But yeah, it does have to do some recomputation of some sort, for sure. Yeah? Did you have a question? Debating. Okay. You're also quiet. It's kind of funny. That was kind of the main stuff. I mean, it's not a lot. Out of curiosity, tell me something that was done tonight that someone was like, wow, that's an interesting thing. I didn't think of that or realize that.
The flag stuff.
The flag stuff?
Yeah, the flags you just demonstrate that you can just use ratio to like do things. I thought flags must be something like you need to use percentage.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, definitely. I think like a good and bad thing is that there are so many different ways to do stuff. Someone also said SVGs in one image. Yeah, that's true. I didn't actually realize you could do that either. I knew about that for like PNGs and stuff, but not SVGs. Someone says, is that the average annual salary for a web dev? What's that in relation to?
Tesla prices.
Oh, Tesla prices. Yeah. I don't really think like, it's funny, I did actually get asked a while ago, how much do web devs get paid? And it's a funny question because if your job title is web developer, probably not a lot. Because like it probably means you're working at like, I don't know, Randwick City Council or something, maintaining their website, But all the money's in tech these days, like it's all coming out of the big tech companies, or it's all coming out of some lucrative industries, if it maybe like mining or high frequency trading or something. But yeah, I don't really know anyone who's like earning good money who's employed as a web developer. They're just software engineers who happen to work on front end. Yeah. Nothing. Yep.
I have a question about the
Yep.
Like dynamic, so it's hard to control it, or should I like add some border to show where is it and where like context can I add, because it's float, it's like dynamic, so
So what's your question's about Flex?
yeah, it's like dynamic thing. When we like give the different window size, it will different.
Sure. Yep.
So how about if we just add like p tag as in like between the two like image, we use the flags. How should we control that then? Like something like change in during we like change the window size.
I get the spirit of your question. I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. I mean, obviously, like just to tease it out, you're talking about the fact that when I resize the image here, the page here, it kind of changes the actual size of it, right? Is your question like, how do I stop it doing that? Or yeah, I mean, the cool thing about Flex is you can play around with things a lot. So let's say, just for instance, playing with this more, blue. So this is me, creating some ratios there. If I wanted to, I could obviously replace this middle element here and say, you know what, I actually just want you to be 600 pixels, full stop. And then it's going to go and do that. Like Flex will Flex will take the fixed elements first, then it'll fill the rest based on the ratios. 600's a bit, maybe 300. But yeah, so that'll kind of handle that. Probably the most common way this is done is probably the other way, is websites that are actually just like Flex 1, but they'll say like, width is 100 pixels. They might have like a left-hand side and then a right-hand side, like this. Because typically small things are hard to be flexible. Like a lot of, and even this, we talk about mobile responsiveness and we ask you to do some stuff with the assignments, but a lot of websites and things aren't truly mobile responsive. I know I talk about Wikipedia every 4 seconds, but Wikipedia is actually like a pretty responsive site. It will just fill out, the president of Peru here will just kind of, or even then they kind of don't. Most websites will follow this kind of pattern where at some point they just don't want to get wider. They have like a maximum width. But again, you'll see here that as I zoom in, it kind of looks like, this is a great example. See how the sides are kind of staying fixed and it's just squashing the content in the middle? That's because it's really hard to take something that's really small and let someone squish it or expand it, because the margins are so different. Whereas a lot of the main content can in general be a bit more easily compressed. So that's a common pattern that you'll see.
I have a question about font. So, how do we know what are the internal fonts that we can choose from?
Oh yeah, so fonts are really interesting. Fonts are defined on the computer. I don't know if I can font book. Is that a thing? Font book. So I'm on my work Mac, and these are all the fonts that I have on this computer. And these are all the ones I can choose from. The funny thing is, like, the way it works is typically is like you just say, here's the font, and anytime anyone loads that on their phone or a web browser, it actually talks to the operating system and says, like, well, probably not the operating system, like the system generally, and says, like, hey, do you have a font called like Yuppie SC? And then it's like, yep, and then it fills that, you know, with that font. It comes from the computer, and if they can't find it, it'll fall back on Times New Roman or something like that. Google again, and this is in the fonts lecture, so you can go and watch that. I think the fonts lecture is recommended. Someone said that before, was it? Oh yeah, recommended. I don't know, a few other websites did it as well, but Google kind of did this thing where they were like, you know what? There's lots of fonts out there that would be really cool. Like if you're building a website and you see a font that looks like, they all kind of look the same. Where's an interesting one that isn't like Arabic or something? Yeah, like this one here. It's like, yeah. So Google was like, oh yeah, so you can kind of type in what you want. Be like, maybe I'm going to make a new website called Kangaroo Bunny, you know? And I'm like, well, it looks really edgy. You can be like, I want to get that font. And then they'll be like, here's the code. You can include this on your site. And then instead of like, so when you're building a web page now, instead of just writing Times New Roman and it looking through the system fonts, this will actually kind of quickly, temporarily download something from Google and install it as a font on, like, within a little, I think, sandbox on the browser or something. And this has been really great because it means someone like you who likes this font doesn't have to just hope other people have it on their computer. So I hope that answers that.
Does also font style come from the font as well? Because sometimes the fonts in Marvel, they don't have serif or they don't have bold or like.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, 100%. Like some fonts have bold but not narrow, I think it's called. Some fonts will have italics but not. And every font's different. Like I can look this up here and be like, this Yuppie SC, I don't know if, I'm not sure what has what, but yeah, italic. So this one has italic, bold, bold italic, black, black italic. I think black is usually like even bolder bold. And they've got Roman too, which is probably thinner. And with these fonts here, I can also see if I go back, this one, yeah, that font. Here they have light 300, regular 400, medium 500, semi-bold 600, bold 700. But that's it. You know, that's like all you have to work with. And that can get really tricky because, yeah, there are some fonts you might like, and then you go font weight bold, and it doesn't look any different on your web page. And you're like, have I forgotten how to bold text? And it's like, no, you are bolding text right, but when it goes to look up the font library, it just doesn't have the information there. It just doesn't exist. So you can say bold, but if it doesn't exist, it just won't work, basically.
In terms of the normal font size, how big is that exactly? Does it have an equivalent to the PT font?
Yeah, so what is the normal font size as a PT? That's a good question. I don't know, actually. Like we can figure it out pretty quickly together. Like if I just make like an index3.html. If I just say like, you know, span style equals font size 20 pt. Hello. Then I make another one where it's just like 1 em. Well, it's not 20 pt, maybe like 14, 13. There you go. I think. I don't know. Yeah, 12. There we go. So 12 pt seems like the basic. But the thing is, like, I run a website for a startup, and what that means is that we don't do as much with accessibility as like larger companies because we have smaller audiences. So I confess to not know a great deal about it. We actually have some lectures that are pre-recorded from a great guy called Mike from Canva who did some good stuff on it. Canva has to worry about it because they've got like they're a global company, right? They make a tiny bit of money off a lot of people. That's their business model. So they have to be accessible. They also get into other areas like language packs. Because when you get a bigger and bigger website, you literally have to start abstracting out all the text and have different language variations from it and load it depending on what's going on. Which again, I don't have to deal with day to day because we build a website for Australians essentially. But I know that there's some element to do with like the EMs and things where when you say 1EM, people can go and turn on in their web browser, they can go change the text size. I don't really have it with me. Accessible text size, because obviously like you know how to zoom in on a web page, but what some browsers will do is they'll actually like not zoom in on the web page. I don't know if I are going to be able to find an easy example. They'll actually just increase the text size. I think you can do this with your own browser. I just can't remember how to do it, because again, anyone can zoom in, right? Like you can just zoom in on that. But there's other ways where you can ask the browser to just make all the text bigger without making the page bigger. And when you use like 1EM, I'm pretty sure it's just basing that off the text size, that like the default size the browser's picking for stuff, which is generally 12 points. So that's kind of more accessible. Whereas if you just say 12 points, you kind of like force people who want like bigger text because they have vision impairments and stuff. I probably got a couple of details of that wrong, but you get the spirit of what I'm getting at. So that's kind of why we use EM, but that was a great question about what's the equivalent for sure.
The previous example, you make a square image circle.
Yes.
Do we have other ways other than setting the
Border radius.
yeah.
Yeah, so can we make a square circle other than setting a border radius? Yeah, so I don't know off the top of my head. I know that there would be ways where like
You use a circle field and just cover the original.
100%. So you could have a square like this, and if you wanted to, for instance, like you could literally cover a middle bit of it by actually making a circle and like putting it on top. You can layer things in the web browser. You can do that using like the z-index property. The other things you can do, and this is quite common in design, is people can go and make masks, they call it. So for instance, like let's say you actually want like a really kind of, like you want to take like a square image, but you want it to look really edgy where instead of it being kind of a circle cutout, it kind of is like wavy like this, you know, for instance. You could go and make basically an image that looks like that, but not the whole background. Oh my God. Let me just cross that, right? You could go and make something like this as an SVG or an image and actually layer that on top of it, make it wide or something like this. And I think CSS also has ways now to kind of mask those two things. I'm not sure. CSS mask, is there a thing? Mask? Yeah, this seems like, this is an example of some of the stuff that comes out in CSS mask example. Yeah, this is exactly what I mean. So like you can basically now kind of actually say to CSS, here's an image, and then here's another mask image, and it will like apply that on top of it. So to your point, someone could, yes, not only just like, could get a circle and just slap that on top, and that could be how they do it. And that's how you can get more interesting things, because obviously border radius is going to be constrained to something that, you know, resembles a border radius. Cool, a couple more questions here before we wrap up. Can you tell us about CSS resets? I don't know what that is, CSS resets. Can you also tell us what's the best practice while setting the heights and widths of body tag? Generally, you don't need to set heights and widths of body tag. Most pages are 100%, like divs are easy because they get 100% width. Sometimes web pages are hard to do heights with. But yeah, sometimes you can do what I did and just do, what are you talking about, sorry? CSS resets. Not sure what you mean, I'm sorry. How do we get the heart on the assignment? Would it be an SVG? So with the assignments, I don't think I'm logged into GitLab right now, but usually what we do is when we give you an image, I forgot how many exclamation marks I've added to the end of my password. It's like 10 by now or something. Yeah, so if I go and find the assignment real quick. Right. You should have, like, where are the hearts? The heart. What question are they in? Question 1. So in question 1, either it should say, yeah, for the heart emoji, you're able to use a reasonable emoji. So in that case, we actually just tell you to just use an emoji. But for other stuff, yes, we do give you the little SVG assets and things like that. Someone says, will there be in-person lectures next week or going forward? Yeah, I'm pretty sure that there's in-person lectures like there's like 2 weeks later on in the term, maybe we don't, but like for a while we do. It says it on the timetable, I'm pretty sure. I mean, they all say in person now, but yeah. That's not something you have to think about at this point. Sometimes if attendance drops to like nearly nil, we avoid it, because when it's at home, we avoid all the mic dropouts and the 10-minute delays and stuff. It's only really worth it if a lot of you turn up like you're doing now. Yeah, it's still 1 lecture per week, just because there's so much content to get through. Now, just as a heads up, this lecture here in week 4 is a pretty cool lecture. It's like our full deep dive into JavaScript. It's probably one of the most important lectures to pay attention to. You don't have to come in person, but it is important. Next week's kind of a funny little lecture. We used to do it as like Node.js, and we probably still will. Can you put your hand up again if you're an undergrad? Yeah, so this course was created before I moved 1531 to JavaScript. So kind of everyone in 6080 had never seen any JavaScript before and any Node.js, so it was kind of like really interesting for everyone. It's kind of had a little less relevance as time goes on, because the undergrads kind of like know it. You know, there's not really like new information there for them. So next week, when we do this kind of Node.js lecture, it's going to be a lot more relevant to the postgrads who haven't touched it before. But if you're an undergrad who feels like you could use a refresher when it comes to JavaScript-y stuff in general, it's still good for you. And also, I'll try and do a little bit more HTML, CSS anyway, because I know there's still undergrads that just kind of come to tune in, or they're going to watch the lecture no matter what. So hopefully that gives a little bit of background on that one. But that's pretty much it for tonight, because we're at time now. So thank you. Hope that was interesting. These demo ones are always hard.